Back to the Kyle Lanslone show, wrapping up this just monster week of news that we've had here. Is the U.S. going to war with Iran? Of course, so many things to talk about. And I am very, very happy today to have Kelley Vlahos returning to the show to help us break all of this down. Kelley, of course, is the editorial director of Responsible Statecraft, senior advisor at the Quincy Institute, and a contributing editor at the American Conservative. Kelley, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, and thanks for asking me back. I really appreciate it. I love this show.
Well, thank you for coming back because your insights are going to be absolutely crucial in this moment. We have just on the brink of a massive catastrophe, and let's try to help our audience understand this a little bit. I have a few questions for you. Is this America's war? Will the U.S. attack Iran? Iraq war propaganda is back, and who's really obsessed with Iran? So starting off here is this an American war? I want to play this clip from the IAEA their chief there, Rafael Grossi, on Iran's nuclear program.
I mean, there is this competition about who is wrong or right about the time that would be needed. Certainly, it was not for tomorrow, maybe not a matter of years. I would there be perhaps more serious about this, and I don't think it was a matter of years. But this is speculation. Why? I go again to the beginning of my comment. These things we don't know, because if there was some activity which was clandestine or hidden or away from our inspectors, we couldn't know. What we informed and what we reported was that we did not have, as in coincidence with some of the sources you mentioned there, that
so,
we did
Kelley,
not have.
We are told, and it's often presented to us, that Israel had to go to war. They had to defend themselves. There was this, massive existential threat to the Jewish state. And this seems to be from an international inspector saying, no, that wasn't the case. So what's your understanding of Iran's nuclear program?
My understanding is basically what you just heard on the screen from the IAEA. From what I understand, like solely from our U.S. intelligence, is that that Iran is not building a bomb. We know that from Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee just a month ago. She said that is their updated intelligence. And frankly, that's been their intelligence since 2007. And when the intelligence community said that Iran was no longer building or no longer pursuing a nuclear weapons program. And so for a long time now, we've known that. We have been tooled around by the Israelis, who, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, who has said time and again that Iran is so close, days, weeks, months, years, to building a bomb. He's put the fear of God into members of Congress, but the bottom line is that they are not pursuing a nuclear weapon. They are enriching uranium. They're enriching uranium because Donald Trump got out of the JCPOA in 2018, where they had restrictions on enrichment, and they now, they are pursuing enrichment capabilities, but that's a far cry from being able to build a bomb. And so what I'm seeing happening here is that the Trump administration is being lulled, cajoled, tooled by the Israeli government into what they wanted all along, and that is to militarily destroy their civilian nuclear program, if not regime change. And I hope and I pray that Donald Trump doesn't take that next step, which would be for us to join the airstrikes on Iran that Israel is engaging in today.
Yeah. And Kelley, I want to ask you about this because it seems after the Israeli strikes began, we had some intelligence leads to the US, including this story that CNN ran saying that it would have taken, if Iran isn't building a nuclear weapon, but even if they chose to tomorrow, it would take them up to 3 years to actually build a bomb. And this was an intelligence community assessment. Do you think these leaks are maybe coming because there are people within the administration who really do oppose this? Or I don't know, maybe how Trump handled Tulsi Gabbard and just dismissing her assessment? Or what do you think this has any political, motivations?
Well, I do know just from the folks that I've talked to and things that I've written in or have read in mainstream newspapers, like the New York Times has been covering this in Politico. There is an absolute divide within the administration today, whether it be in the National Security Council or the Pentagon or State Department, over whether or not the United States should take military action against Iran. And so I think it's absolutely credible that people within the intelligence community, within the administration, might be talking to reporters and saying, listen, this isn't as dire as the Israelis are saying it is. There is the opportunity right now to get back to the bargaining table like the Trump administration was. I mean, I hate to repeat this over and over again, but we were going into the sixth round of talks with Iran over brokering a new deal. And yeah, were there log jams and sticking points? Absolutely, particularly over whether or not Iran should have the right to enrich uranium for civilian purposes. But the process was ongoing. And I think that there are people within the administration who want to remind Trump, as well as others in power now, as well as Congress and the American people, that there is a diplomatic off ramp here, that the threat is not as imminent as Netanyahu and his government would like us to believe.
So that's exactly where I wanted to take the conversation next and really ask you. I think one of the fundamental questions today is, Kelley, if this wasn't Iran getting on the brink of a nuclear bomb and they had a delivery system for that bomb and they were prepared because of their Muslim ideological devotion to wiping out the Jewish people in the Jewish state. Let's just say those are truly the monsters that the Iranians were, and they were about to get their nuclear weapon. They're about to wipe out the Jewish people. Then at least Israel could claim this is a defensive war, that's a preemptive strike. But that's not what was happening, as we just established. So this means for Israel, it's a war of choice. Additionally, it means it's a war of choice for the United States of America because we're not intervening to defend the Jewish state. So my question to you is this effectively an American war?
Absolutely not. I mean, when we think of where we are today compared to, let's just say, 3 months ago, when we were talking about Gaza, I mean, have we forgotten that the President of the United States was engaging in talks, or his envoy, Steve Witkoff, was engaging in talks with the Israelis and Hamas to end the war there? And that was what we were all talking about. Can Trump get a deal and stop the slaughter and carnage in Gaza and start getting humanitarian aid to the Palestinians there? All of a sudden, we are in crisis mode because the Israelis have convinced Trump and convinced everybody else in the information space that they are an imminent threat to the point where they have to strike Iran. I mean, this is not only not our war, this is unreal to me that this is the conversation today. Will Trump enjoin these strikes? Won't he? He should have put his foot down immediately. I do not know what's going on in the administration. And so I can't get into like where the minute to minute deliberations are or in Trump's heart and what he's thinking. But he was just saying 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that he did not want to go to war with Iran and that he wanted a diplomatic pathway. And he had gone so far as to say that he told Netanyahu that. Now we're sitting here discussing whether or not this is an American war or not. It absolutely is not an American war. And Trump and his own people have said that time and again. Now, suddenly, since Friday, it's become a question over whether or not it is our war. And I find that so disheartening and actually terrifying, because I feel like we have lost some sort of agency in this situation. And I honestly, I don't even know what to think, because 1 minute Trump seems to be allowing some space for the possibility of going back to the bargaining table, and we can talk about whether or not that's even going to work at this point. And then saying things like, maybe I'll bomb, maybe I won't, in a flippant manner. And so it really has the American people on edge right now. I do feel on edge, and I know you probably feel the same. Waking up
Yeah.
every day and going to your phone to scroll around to figure out if we're at war or not, and
Yep.
that's no exaggeration.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I refresh the president's True Social channel, because I feel like that's where maybe we get the declaration of war, not through Congress. Now, I do want to play this next clip from Donald Trump talking about how he would like to see this war end.
What does unconditional surrender mean?
Well, you know what it means, unconditional.
Can you explain it for
two
those
very
who
simple
don't?
words, very simple. Unconditional surrender. That means I've had it. Okay, I've had it. I give up. No more. Then we go blow up all the all the nuclear stuff that's all over the place there. No, they had bad intentions. For 40 years they've been saying death to America, death to Israel, death to anybody else that they didn't like. They were bullies. They were schoolyard bullies. And now they're not bullies anymore, but we'll see what happens. Look, nothing's finished until it's finished. War is very complex. A lot of bad things can happen.
So, Kelley, one of my primary concerns here, and why I don't think this is going to be a situation like we saw during Trump's first term, where after Iran downed an American drone or launched missiles at a base housing U.S. soldiers in Iraq, Trump was able to de-escalate and unwind it, because he's putting forward and publicly stating that Iran has to agree to an unconditional surrender, which, of course, isn't something that a country that still has missiles and a military is going to do. This seems like an absurd starting point for any kind of negotiations to end this. What do you think Trump is thinking by making this kind of statement?
I have no idea what he's thinking. I don't know what he's thinking when he says things like, they've been saying death to America for 40 years. That's not true. I mean, you could just go back 25 years to after 9/11, where they actually offered George Bush help in going after Al Qaeda and the Taliban. And George Bush said no, and mostly because the Israelis said we can never, ever work with the Iranians. And then the Iranians helped us actually go after and kill and destroy ISIS in Iraq. So this whole idea, and this is what really bothers me with the propagandistic coverage of this war or these strikes so far, is that they've distilled the U.S.-Iranian relationship into this caricature that they have been an imminent threat to the United States and have called for our destruction, have called for Israel's destruction for 40 years. And that's just not true. This idea that we've been at war with Iran and at some level for 40 years is not true. But I feel like the administration has to promulgate this narrative in order to soften the blow if and when we do join Israel on these strikes, as a justification for joining Israel on these strikes. I don't know what he's thinking from moment to moment, but I have to say, these comments that he makes, where he says that the Ayatollah Khomeini should be killed, on his Truth Social, when he talks about unconditional surrender, all of it is so it's counterproductive. And like I hinted at before, if he really does at some point want to get back to the bargaining table, every time he makes a comment like this, and in addition to these ongoing strikes that Israel has been launching since Friday, the chances for an actual deal to be struck goes down, down, down. Why? Because of two things. One, if Iran believes that Trump was in on these strikes from the beginning, which he's kind of hinted, he can't help but brag. like, oh, I knew the exact date, of course I knew about them, he brags that American equipment is actually helping, and missile defense and American made, assets are assisting. He's bragging about all this. So if that is the case, there is absolutely no trust going into new talks. If Trump is lying to cover up the fact that the Israelis did something without our green light, that looks like we are weak, and we have no game when we go to the table, because anything that we say or agree to can be undercut in the region by the Israelis. Or a third scenario where it's been suggested that the Trump administration lulled the Iranians by engaging in several rounds of talks just to get them complacent so that the Israelis can launch these attacks. That hurts the trust factor. So either way, I don't know how the Iranians could see us as good faith brokers when we go back to the table. So, I mean, and the whole idea of unconditional surrender, do you really think that the Iranians are just going to capitulate now? They have nothing to lose at this point. If they capitulate, they're finished. The regime is finished. So this idea that they're just going to roll over and die before, and allow, and then he makes this point of saying they're going to unconditionally surrender, and then we're going to go in there and destroy all their new. It seems a little fantastical to me, and it doesn't seem well thought out or informed. And if I were advising him, I'd say, listen, stop talking to the press about this unless it's a statement that's been, worked on and workshopped, and you want to convey some new information to the press, fine. But stop the Truth Social and stop making these radical comments to reporters at press conferences and getting off of Air Force One, because they're not very helpful. It may make him sound tough to say we're gonna kill, the supreme leader of Iran. But honestly, it's enraging the Iranian people, and it's actually creating more nationalism, more rally around the flag, which is going to be a little bit of a problem if regime change is in the offing.
Yeah, it certainly will. Kelley, my next question for you is, will the U.S. attack Iran? And before you answer that, I just want to play this latest clip of Donald Trump talking about, I'm not sure if we will or not.
Answer questions about whether you are moving closer, or you believe the U.S. is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities. Where's your mindset on that?
I can't say that, right? You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question? Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. Why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago?
Can I address that one thing quickly
absolutely.
first? Okay, that's another part of the narrative that's really gotten a bee in my bonnet. He talks as though the Iranians, A, didn't want to negotiate, and B, killed a deal. And I remember listening to this in my car last Saturday after the initial Israeli strikes. He said, hey, I tried to deal. They didn't want the deal. That's BS. They were going into the 6th round of talks. As far as we know, there was no deal. And if there was a deal, it hadn't been conveyed openly or publicly. So we have to take it on faith that there was some deal and that the Iranians rejected that deal. As far as I know, the talks were ongoing. There was a logjam over civilian enrichment. But the Iranians never said they didn't want to negotiate. There were plans to go into a 6th round of talks. Does that sound to you that the Iranians didn't want to negotiate with him? He's flat out lying there. And what he's doing is he is assuming or hoping that the American people haven't been paying any attention up until now, because now it's on everybody's news feed and local news and what have you. And if you're an American consumer who just kind of dips in and out of foreign policy, and you're like, whoa, what's going on? Why is Israel bombing Iran? And the president gets up there and says, well, I tried to bring them to the table to negotiate their nuclear weapons program. And they said no. And, I gave them a shot. They're going to go, oh, yeah, okay. There is no nuclear weapons program, and they weren't engaged in negotiations. So it is a flat out lie. And I think that we need to keep banging the drum on that, because I don't want this to be another WMD's 2003, where administration officials just keep repeating the same lie over and over until it gets into the bloodstream. And then the American people go, well, I guess you didn't have any choice. So I think that bothers me the most about this is the lying. If you feel so justified in assisting your Israeli partners in a war of choice, then you should be able to articulate it in a way where you don't have to lie and twist the truth. And that's what he's doing.
I mean, this is exactly where I want to go with the conversation next, which is I've seen, of course, we've ran it at antiwar.com. I've seen some great articles at Responsible Statecraft, particularly one from David Vine, really comparing how this is so similar. The propaganda is so similar to what we experienced in the run up to the Iraq war. I actually have a brief montage of clips to play for everyone, and then I would like to get your thoughts on it.
Neither the United States of America nor the world community of nations can tolerate deliberate deception and offensive threats on the part of any nation, large or small.
Every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community. Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
They have ballistic missiles that can now reach deep into Europe and soon could reach the United States. You want these people to have nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them to your cities? Today it's Tel Aviv, tomorrow it's New York.
So, Kelley, I will never forget. Yeah, I was a child during the run to the Iraq War. I think I was 12, 13 years old. And when I heard that George Bush, the smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud line, I was really scared that the United States was going to get nuked. And they made me so terrified that it really made me hate them when I found out it was a lie. And I just can't believe that they're getting away with rolling out the same propaganda. Like, shouldn't everybody else be just as upset that we are? That not only are they trying to dupe us into another pointless war in the Middle East, but they're so lazy they're not even using new propaganda.
I mean, I agree with you with everything, but that they're getting away with it.
Okay.
I lived through that as a reporter, and so it's very fresh in my mind. It was the echo chamber or bubble or whatever you want to call it was so fierce, and there was such a lockdown on information because we didn't have social media. We didn't even have blogs back then. The gatekeeping in mainstream media was so hardcore that you really had to go. You really had to be actively searching for alternative news. Thank you, antiwar.com. But it just wasn't like today where you have a social media information space where people are challenging the narrative in real time, minute to minute. And you didn't have the voices with huge audiences like Tucker Carlson, for example, and now Steve Bannon and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Charlie Cook, all on the right, mind you, challenging the lies and the mismanagement, the propagandistic coverage. So that's the sliver of good news. But I do agree with you that there is for example, the fact that you and I and everybody else has had to spend some time talking about whether or not Iran's nuclear program rose to the level of immediate action, or the need for immediate action from Israel, seems to me to be part of this propaganda. Because what we really should be talking about, is Gaza, and why the Israelis felt the need to shift gears so dramatically to Iran when they haven't finished their business in Gaza. They're trying to tell us that they can achieve not only the destruction of this nuclear program, which I'm not sure they can, but even regime change, when they haven't even been able to destroy Hamas in their backyard. My point is that they're already managing the message. We're all sitting here talking about Fordo and whether or not bunker busting bombs can take them out, and whether or not, like, that should not be the conversation. The conversation should be, is this in the United States' best interest to get involved and to continue to get involved directly, but even continuing to support Israel with our missile defense, with all of the weapons that we've been giving them? This is the conversation we should be having, but we're not having. We don't seem to be having that. The mainstream media doesn't seem to be having that conversation. What they're having is typically the conversation about the tactical moves that Israel is making. There's a huge piece in the Financial Times about the Mossad and how there was a multi-year effort for them to gain the intelligence to have this sneak surprise attack in which they took out all of these Iranian scientists and top leaders. And wow, oh my God, their prowess is just amazing. And and all the technical talk about Fordo and how much is Iran enriching, and come on, that's just blather. But that's how they got us sucked in and lulled into acceptance of the Iraq War. It was all tactical, technical talk about Saddam Hussein and inspections and weapons of mass destruction. And then there was talk about regime change and who would take over after that. And there was never the overall, the big picture question, like, should we be doing this? And that's what I fear. I mean, you and I are talking about that. Plenty of people are. But in terms of the mainstream, and the mainstream is not just the New York Times or the Washington Post, it's the Associated Press. It is all of the syndicated news organs that the general public listen to because they come over their news feeds, or they see them on network television or cable news or whatever. And it's not informed. There's no nuance. There are no tough questions. And that's, I do fear that we are sort of like sliding down or sleepwalking into another war because of that.
You mentioning Gaza there is probably really important. This week, an Israeli tank apparently opened fire and killed about 59 Palestinians who are just trying to get to an aid distribution site in Gaza. And you imagine that would be a massive story, maybe not massive, but certainly a headline news story if the war in Iran wasn't going on, sucking up all the headlines. Now, another interesting part of the propaganda I want to ask you about, and I guess this probably compares to the Iraq war cakewalk thing, right? Where if you listen to the mainstream media coverage, Israel has won. Iran is beaten. It's just a matter of time before they give up. But if you read and kind of parse through even some of the mainstream articles, there's been 4 articles in the past day, one from Middle East Eye, which is not necessarily mainstream U.S. media, but 3 were Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and the Washington Post all said that Israel's running short on air defense interceptors, and they don't know how many missiles that the Iranians actually have. And so I know, you're not a military analyst, but you certainly read a lot of their coverage. And how strong is Israel's position right now, do you think?
I can't tell you that with any categorical confidence, but like you mentioned, there are little signifiers that you can pick up on. One is that they don't want anybody to be filming the missiles. They have laws against protesting. There's censorship going on all over the place. So my guess is we're not getting a full picture of how these Iranian missiles have been landing and how much destruction they're causing. So that's just that one level. Second, as you mentioned, the resources to wage this kind of war, this kind of air war against Iran is not limitless. And it is exacerbated, that point is exacerbated by the fact that we are their primary patron in this war, and that we have been emptying our stores of weapons, missile defense in particular, and the missiles that are used for missile defense since 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we committed to helping Ukraine and to fight as long as it had to in order to expel Russian forces from their territory. And until Donald Trump came into office, the administration was full throttle on emptying those stores. And we've done stories like this, and we're not the only ones. You just Google, running out of ammunition, running out of missiles, and our military has been ringing the alarms on this for a while now. So you have that, and then after October 7th, the Houthis started attacking the ships in the Red Sea out of solidarity for the Palestinians and what was going on in Gaza. And we decided that we were going to lead a coalition of the willing to combat that, and which meant that it was all us, a little bit of UK involved, but it was mostly us. And so we have been expending multi-million-dollar missiles to fight little missiles that have and drones that the Houthis have been lobbing at us for since November 2023. Now, has that been consistent? No, but there were at least two eras, or whatever you want to call it, spaces of time in which we ramped up that fight during the Biden administration, more recently under Trump, where we've spent over $2 billion of our assets in the Red Sea. Now, we're helping Israel. We're running out. They're running out. The defense industry can't just, conjure these things up out of thin air and they can't whip them up. And these people have raising these alarms for some time. So I'm glad to see it, because if we don't stop and cut them off, then the next best thing is that we all run out, and the war has to end, which is probably making Israel a little nervous right now, because it did seem as though they thought that the Iranians would capitulate right away. And as you mentioned, Kyle, they're still striking Tel Aviv, which says a lot about missile defense on their end. We've heard about the glories of the Iron Dome for how many years now? Well, guess what? Right. Without U.S. assistance, that Iron Dome is hardly 100% guarantee. Even with our assistance, missiles have gotten through. They got through last April, and then I think the other round of attacks was, I want to say, August. I'm sorry, I'm running out. I'm getting my months mixed up.
There, yeah.
But there were two rounds of attacks and volleys back and forth that we had to assist. And if we didn't, more of those missiles would have gotten through to Tel Aviv. And so, there are these little data points that we can seize upon to elicit that maybe things aren't going as swimmingly as the mainstream media is suggesting. I keep hearing that Iran is losing, but then I go on my feed and I see missiles hitting apartment buildings, a hospital. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying, hey, if everything was in place and that Israel was winning, we wouldn't be seeing those images a week after. Yeah. It's been almost 7 days.
Great point. And Kelley, I can't let you go today without talking to you about one of the biggest stories right now, which is the Tucker Carlson, Ted Cruz interview. And so much of it focused on the war going on in Iran and Americans' involvement in the relationship with Israel. And one of the points they got stuck on for a while, and I think had a really important conversation, is asking the question, who is obsessed with Israel? And I want to play for you this clip of their conversation, then get your take on that.
Do you think that it's just interesting because what you're now describing in a very defensive way, I will say, is foreign influence over our politics?
No.
And you began, and it's so transparently obvious to everybody. I don't know why you would be embarrassed of it. You've said that you are sincerely for Israel. I believe you. I don't think you have some weird agenda. You seem to be sincere.
By the way, Tucker, it's a very weird thing. The obsession with Israel. When we're talking about foreign countries,
it's hardly an obsession.
You're not talking about Chinese. You're not talking about Japanese. You're not talking about the Brits. You're not talking about the French. The question, what about the Jews? What about the Jews?
Oh, I'm an anti-Semite now.
Senator, you're asking the questions, Tucker. You're asking, why are the Jews controlling our foreign policy?
Senator,
that's what you just asked.
Hardly saying that. And I have
That is exactly what you just said.
Well, actually, I can speak for myself and tell you what I am saying.
Good.
On behalf not simply of myself, but on of my many Jewish friends who would have the same questions, which is to what extent, and it's interesting you're trying to derail my questions by calling me an anti-Semite, which you are.
I did not.
Of course you are. And rather than be honorable enough to say it right to my face, you are in a sleazy feline way implying it, or just asking questions about the Jews. I'm not asking questions about the Jews. There's nothing to do with Jews or Judaism. It has to do with the foreign government.
Isn't Israel controlling our foreign policy? That's not about the Jews?
You said, I'm asking you.
And by the way, you're the one that just called me, I think, a sleazy feline. So let's be clear.
It's sleazy to imply that I'm an anti-Semite, which you just did.
No, I just said, why is that the only question you're asking? You answer it. Give me another reason. If you're not an anti-Semite, give me another reason why the obsession is Israel.
I am in no sense obsessed with Israel. We are on the brink of war with Iran. And so these are valid questions.
But you're not asking about Iran or the
If I can finish, you asked me why I'm obsessed with Israel.
Yep.
3 minutes after telling me that when you first ran for Congress, you elucidated one of your main goals, which is to defend Israel.
Yes.
And I'm the one who's obsessed with Israel. I don't see a lawmaker's job as defending the interests of a foreign government, period. Okay. Any government, including the ones that my ancestors come from. So that's my position. That does not make me an anti-Semite. And shame on you for suggesting otherwise. And I mean that.
So, Kelley, after watching all of that, who seems obsessed with Israel? Tucker Carlson or the Tetson, who said he was elected to the Senate to represent the state of Israel?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many data points in terms of like showing how obsessed Congress is with Israel. But I mean, you only have to go so far as the legion of bills that have been introduced in Congress since October 7th that would censor speech, for example, define anti-Semitism on college campuses, end any boycotts, like Americans boycotting Israel. I mean, here we're in a country that is dealing with simultaneous social, economic crises, political. We can't afford our health care. I mean, serious issues, the deficit that when people go to the ballot box, that's what they want their members of Congress to be dealing with. And they get into office and they start trying to legislate speech on behalf of Israel. I mean, who's obsessed? And that's just one example of the obsession. I'm flummoxed that Congress can get away with doing this. And then going back to their constituents and saying, well, what did you get done? You know, Congresswoman Smith. Oh, well, I introduced a bill that would prevent you from protesting Israel. Huh? What? But that goes on every day. I don't think the American people realize when we say Congress isn't doing anything, that, yeah, they're doing stuff. All those bills, most of them will just go into a dustbin and never see the light of day. But there are a few that they've had to spend time deliberating and debating. You know, Senator Paul, had to go and in his committee, the Homeland Security Committee, I believe, and give this full-throated defense of speech because they were debating whether or not to redefine anti-Semitism to make sure that students weren't protesting in ways that they didn't like. What?
Absolutely absurd how much control that the Israel lobby has on Capitol Hill. Unfortunately, Kelley, that's the time we have for today, but it was great having you back on the show. We had an excellent, very large live audience, a lot of people in the YouTube comment section. Everybody liked what we had to say. So, Kelley, I'll have you back on the show again soon. And of course, everybody check out everything going over on Responsible Statecraft and at the Quincy Institute, where just so much of the most important commentary on the foreign policy now is being discussed. So thank you, Kelley.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you to your audience. I really appreciate being here.